Hi, I'm Hannah Brents. I am a licensed independent clinical social worker and a registered yoga instructor with a private practice in Massachusetts. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in religious studies, and I know firsthand how damaging toxic fundamentalist religious communities can be. So thanks for being here. Before we jump into today, remember to subscribe to the Theology Therapist channel, press the bell notification to get updates on all new releases. And if you find any of this helpful, I would love if you'd leave a comment and share with a friend. So today I want to talk about post-therapy anxiety. So feeling anxious after you have your therapy sessions. This could be like after the very first one, or it could be after even having seen your therapist for a while, but you notice that after you meet with your therapist for sessions, you feel really anxious. So I want to talk first about why this happens. Usually we are in therapy for processing really difficult stuff or growing out of old patterns that no longer serve us. And these conversations can kick up a lot of dust and cause emotional turmoil. This may also happen because therapy sessions are generally 45 minutes, so you have a short time to talk about difficult things. There isn't a lot of time to build up with small talk like you may naturally do with friends. And then if your therapist doesn't leave time before the end of the session to slow down, to calm down, and practice some grounding techniques, then you may feel like you just had a whirlwind of an hour and you're left by yourself wondering what the heck happened. First thing to know is that it is actually quite common to feel this way. Doesn't mean it feels good, but it's actually pretty common. The other thing is that you have to leave this intense interaction and integrate back into your day. It's like this expectation that you're gonna have like this really, which not every session is like a really big session. Some sessions are just kind of normal, and that's okay. But sometimes they are like really big sessions, and then the expectation is that you just go about your day, right? And then that's not really an expectation that we typically have anywhere else. Probably a big why this happens. Now here's some what I would call basics to assess. First is, do you feel connected to your therapist? This, I would say, is the very first thing to consider. If you don't feel bonded to your therapist, then the end of a tough conversation is going to leave you feeling more alone. Side note, it may also be harder for you to have these tough conversations if you don't feel connected to your therapist. The other basic that I would suggest that you assess is if there is any sort of adjustment that you can ask for that would support the connection with your therapist. Would it be asking to sort of wrap up a few minutes before what you've been typically doing so that you guys can leave time to do a grounding practice together? Is it seeing if you need to change the time or the day that you are having your appointments? If you think that changing the time or the day of your therapy session is going to make it easier for you to be in that session, to feel connected to your therapist, to not have anxiety after the session, and to get the most out of the hour, then some of the things that can be really supportive is like figuring out, is it going to feel better to have therapy on a day when you're not working? Is it going to feel better to have therapy on like after you finished work or in the morning when like you have quiet and reflective time or before everyone wakes up? Like thinking about when would be best supportive of you having therapy. I think that is a really important factor in the post-therapy like anxiety, but in some ways it's a little bit harder because that one is only within your control within a limited amount, because most therapists have like normal working hours. Some may work nights, few may work weekends. I work early morning, so you might have some capacity to control the day or the time that you do see your therapist, but it isn't completely within your control. Some of the other things that I've talked about today and some of these tips, the tips I'm going to give you, are more within your control. So I wanted to give like a little note about changing the day or the time. Still important to think about, but there may be limitations. Or maybe it would feel more supportive to you to actually build up with small talk, right? About like the week and stuff. And that's a natural ask. The thing about building up with small talk is that recognizing that there isn't a lot of time in therapy, and that sometimes, like in our everyday relationship, we can kind of get sucked into that, sort of small talk where we skip all, like we glaze over the important stuff. And so I would just say with that one, just pay attention to if that might happen or that might be the tendency. The other basic to assess is what I would call a buffer time. You are likely going to need to give yourself transition period to go from therapy session to the next event. This might happen at the end of the session, like with a grounding practice, but it might actually be for a period of time after the session is over. So for like the next 15 minutes or the next hour, allow yourself the space to digest what was said and what wasn't said, and to move through it so that you can move on to the next thing. And the other thing is that you might want to potentially review some notes that you took during the session. Okay, so I came up with a whole handful of ideas of tips of what to do like during that buffer time after your therapy session whenever you are feeling anxious. So first one, like these aren't one size fits all, so you may like one idea and not another. You may have your own ideas. If you do, leave them in a comment so that you can give us ideas too. The first one that I came up with was take a walk. Nature can be really grounding. It can be really expansive, and so like broaden our perspective, and it can just, if the fresh air does us a lot of good, it can clear our minds. And so taking a walk, even if it's just around the block, like it's not even necessarily in nature, can be really good for us. And it can provide that liminal moment, that transition moment between one thing and the other, because you are even changing space. So taking a walk is a great idea. The next idea is, if you have a pet, cuddling your pet can be a huge resource. You may have already figured this out, but pets, like if you have a fish, this is kind of hard to do. But if you have like a dog or cat or, typical domestic animal, then they're so tactile and they have pressure and warmth and the feeling of the fur, like the tactile nature of cuddling a pet can be so calming to the nervous system that it is a great way to decompress whenever you're feeling anxious. Plus, pets also generally give us unconditional love. If you're a cat owner, maybe not, just kidding. But pets give us unconditional love. And so if we were talking about really tough stuff in therapy and we are needing that sort of felt reassurance, pets are a great way to find that. Third tip that I came up with is journaling. Journaling is a great idea. It's probably not for everybody, but it's a really good idea after, a big therapy session, or when you are feeling really activated, to process, to get things out of your head and onto paper. It's important to get stuff that is swirling around and won't let us go. If you have a thought that just won't let you go, it's important to really actually get it out of your head. And so journaling can be a great way to do that. There are also lots of different ways to journal, but that's a whole other conversation. So you don't have to do the typical Dear Diary. It could be bullet points, it could be creative journaling, art journaling. There are lots of different ways to do that, but that can be a really nice resource. Fourth tip is exercise. Moving emotions through and out of your body. So whether that's cardio, yoga, slow flow, whether that's anything. It could be dance. it can literally just be anything as long as you are moving your body, right? So exercise is a huge coping skill. It's for me, I know it's for a lot of you. And so maybe after your therapy session, you want to plan to go on a run, or you want to plan to go to a yoga session, or whatever it is. Fifth tip, affirmations. Affirmations are a great thing to, you can prep them ahead of time if you want to have like physical, something that you see, but they're great to have after a therapy session as like a supplemental thing. So the positive reinforcement. So maybe like a lot of times on Instagram or social media, there will be people who post like essentially affirmations on like a really cute or like pretty or whatever that works for you background, and you can screenshot those. So if you make one or you find somebody who posts, sort of like nice affirmation wallpaper, you can screenshot that, keep that on your phone and look at it to remind yourself that you're safe, that you're loved, all of the good things. You can also make affirmation cards, like that could be a fun like sort of art project, or you could buy an affirmation deck. There are lots of affirmation decks. This can be really nice because they can just remind you of fundamental truths. All right, I think we're at our sixth tip here. So I have a bunch, but the sixth tip would be music. So music is a great resource. It is a huge coping skill. Don't forget it. Research has shown that music actually changes our brain waves. So that is huge. I mean, it might depend on like what music you're listening to, but it can also really connect us to the mood that we are experiencing. So what that might mean is if you're feeling really anxious and activated, maybe you have a playlist of classical music, something that's really like that I think is the music that research shows changes your brainwaves. So the classical music, maybe you preemptively put together a playlist of all of your favorite music for whatever mood it is, and you have that as your go-to. Like that is great. So the other thing about music is that if you are a musician or if you know how to play an instrument, like maybe after your session, you want to sit and play the piano, or you want to sit and strum on the guitar. Like that is a really great transition moment or transition activity. Tip 7, talk to a loved one. Have a conversation with a loved one who can talk you through, who can be silly with you, and who can remind you that you are loved. Tip 8, I would say tip 8 within certain circumstances, but I have tip 8 is laughter. So laughter is, I don't mean it in like a forceful way or an insincere way, but it came to my mind when I was thinking about tip number 7 of talking to a loved one. Because like if you're like grieving, right, I'm not saying like go and laugh around and like everything's gonna be great, but laughter is really healing. And it might happen that when you are talking to a loved one, you guys may laugh together, you may cry together, but you may laugh together, right? And so it may also, like sometimes if we, like especially with anxiety, we can just get like, we get like, those horse blinders on, like we get stuck in like tunnel vision, and it can be really hard to take them off and like break out of that. And so we can get stuck in that mindset or that mentality of whatever the thing is that we're thinking about, or like our overthinking or rumination or anxious thoughts, whatever they are. And laughter can just kind of like open that up a little bit. And it can kind of broaden that perspective. It's like a little bit of like that lightheartedness. So I don't mean laughter in a way of like avoiding the hard stuff or anything like that, but in a way of like when we're really talking about post-therapy anxiety, of like a loosening, of like an opening, right? Which is, anxiety is like a grip, like a death grip. It's like a tight hold. So the laughter is that kind of opening. So there are a couple different ways maybe to find that laughter that feels a little bit more genuine. It might come up when you're talking to a friend. Maybe you find a new show that you really like that's kind of silly or funny, or maybe even trying like a smile meditation, which might sound really weird, but can be part of your practice. All right, so 8 tips for post-therapy anxiety. If you try any of them and you like them, let me know. If you have any others of your own, please put them in the comments so that we can share ideas. Be well this week, and I'll see you next week.